Now, looking around, it doesn't seem that we are too many. So, conclusion. One, worst for me, you are not really interested in what I'm going to say. Second worst, you already heard several times about the topic because I already had the opportunity to talk about it at various events. But I'll try to present to you something different from a different angle, because this act, this law, remains a determining element for the profession and prescribes quite many requirements for the future in this area. Cyber protection. Cyber protection. So this is a key word and used more and more frequently. And I already said that cyber protection is a nice expression, but how many of you do you have any diploma or paper that you have something to do with cyber protection, except for me, because I am the diploma which says that I'm a cybernetics engineer. So I can, of course, talk about these matters by profession. So sometimes we don't know what the whole thing is about, but more and more it is getting to be clarified. So it is not a law on cyber matters at all. Maybe it's a basis for cybernetics, but in order to be one about cyber protection or something similar, what we would need is to have such a high-level government organ that would somehow coordinate, control, supervise this activity, meaning that it is not only within public administration, because even the activities within public administration cannot be coordinated. You can two or three ministries to cooperate and to go to the same direction. It's almost impossible. So it's not only these agencies that have to cooperate, but all the businesses, service providers who have anything to do with national protection in the area of cybernetics. Banks, energy suppliers, telecommunication companies, whatever else we can group under this heading. So, of course, all the interests and matters of these agencies would have to be coordinated, and some kind of a lead agency or a lead public administrator would be needed who would somehow control the whole thing. Now, this is no question about that. This is out of question. So from then on, then we talk about cyber protection, and with this law, we could create the grounds for this protection, which means that for IT systems, electronic IT systems, and also I'll say a few words about the others, some kind of possibility for protection would be granted. Now, before this act was adopted, there were plenty who came up with ideas that there would be some kind of protection in the area of information technology and cybernetics, and there were some provisions on that account, because the third line from below says that the credit institutions and financial companies and the act about these, they have a provision in Article 13C to the effect that the IT systems of the banks should be secure, and that what are the criteria for them to be recognized as secure. But to put that into 11 odd lines, that is not very convincing. So these were some of the proceedings, and in 1912, the government issued a strategy on national security, where there was a sentence, a phrase which would suggest that it is important to reinforce the security of electronic IT systems, the IT information of strategic interest for the nation in order to create an appropriate level of cyber protection. So there was already a decision of the government that this should be a task to be performed, but of course, in many cases, you could already experience that decisions were taken, but then already for the first government of Mr. Jules Chang, which also specified that it would be necessary to develop a national information strategy. Has any one of you seen that kind of a strategy? It was about 10 years ago that was provided for. I saw plenty of drafts. Some of them were also involved in writing it up, but we didn't get even to the point that the government would put it on the agenda, its agenda. So that was still too little, but still something enough to serve as a basis for the elaboration of this act, of this law, because those who took part, and including myself, in the elaboration of this act, we tried to make use of the best professional experience and integrate that into it. All the scientific literature, COBIT, ISO 27 something, NIST, SP standards. So all these standards were taken into consideration. IFIP 199, 200. So at the level of developing the concepts, together with my colleague Csaba Krasnai, we were really even physically arguing and writing up various ideas of what we should integrate into it. And from the professional point of view, this law, of course, was drafted by legal experts, by lawyers. We only contributed from our professional background, so there would be some technical elements integrated into it. Its structure would be based on that. So we tried to take into account the best international norms and standards, also to integrate some of the Hungarian provisions, a recommendation which was made to this effect. Now, IT security, electronic system security, that is also one of my favorite slides. Sometime back in 2003, there was in the Ministry of IT, Technology and Information, some of the elderly generation would still recall that. And already at that time I had the opportunity to show this slide. So there is an idea which says electronic information protection, especially in the NATO terminology, which effectively actually means that various IT, computer systems, their information should be protected by electronic means. This classical logical protection by setting these various protection tools in our systems, the firewalls and all the others, and to put in place a protection in this way, which is then complemented by physical protection, document protection, also by the question of intelligence and thwarting of intelligence. And although I think that many of the participants will not will not have contact with any of that, and anyhow this is punished by law if you do some mischief there. So it means the protection of all those who are integrated into these circuits. Of course, those are people who are getting who are about to be involved. They will be closely looked at and investigated upon. The physical protection is the physical environment itself. The physical object, the infrastructure, the hardware elements, and all other physical tools, and the protection of them that are involved. Protection of the documents means, of course, the protection of the paper-based the paper document, the hard copies, and all those information supports. That is the classical approach of that I regulate, I keep on record, I close it up, and of course intelligence and deterring intelligence is identifying those who steals, who is, and all those who are involved. And all these together are called the protection of information, which is about whatever kind of information, of course, so not only paper-based and not only electronic information in the computers, but any other type of information. Well, I don't know if I mentioned to you that information is worst bound in skin, not leather, but skin, that is in the head of a man, brain. So whoever will hear about it, of course, if it is in your brain, what to do with them, with the people we employ. Now, protection of electronic information systems. This is this kind of a grouping, which of course serves the protection of the overall electronic information. But personal protection, from physical protection, and from all, document protection, all the elements which are linked to the electronic information. So whenever we speak about electronic protection of electronic information, we could even say in another way that all the information present in an electronic information system. So that means that whatever is not linked to that, not connected to that, that is outside of the scope. But we still have to deal with that, of course, in another way. Now let's have a look at this wonderful thing, what is the electronic information system. It's a new notion in the law. Is it? Not at all. Far from that. We met this notion several times, maybe not in the same context, but it's of course the problem starts where it was already not clear what would be the title of the law. Information protection was not found to be not the proper protection, because protection of information covers a lot of other things as well, whatever you have in your brain, on paper, and protecting information. And we have several pieces of law dealing with the protection of information in other areas, for example, the protection of personal data. There is a more complicated name for that, but this is how to put it simple. Also other elements of information. So another law on the protection of information would have been too much about practically almost the same thing. And as it does not only deal with information, as I tried to outline that just before, so we can simply say information technology security. But if it is, if we would have called it IT, then the ministry which was there to supervise it and to do it could not have done it, because for IT there is another ministry that is responsible for, and that would have been then an overlap of competencies. No joke. No joke. So several of us, we were trying to figure out what we should come up with. And well, these are playing around with some of the Hungarian words on IT, information system, whatever. In Anglo-Saxon term, you have this ICT, was also taken into consideration. But once translated literally into Hungarian, IKT, what that would mean, information communication technology, in the Hungarian language and in some of the other Eastern European languages where information technology has started to be used, because what information, well, it's the same. Anyhow, in Hungarian there are two versions for the same thing. So electronic information systems. And to this electronic information system, we have identified a definition that previously was IT system the point is that it should be a system that processes information with some tools, with some device means, but not by only linking to each other, because just various devices linked to each other is still just a pile of devices, not yet a system. But there are various provisions and processes, and here by processes we have to understand two things. The processes can go to directions. So one process or procedure is the something for the people to abide by and prescribe various laws, but also a kind of software, for example, which is a process invented for a computer. What a software? Software describes how a machine should work, and that is also the description of a process. And then what is really very important, and we cannot discard, are the people. Without people, it's still a dead end, and this together is what we call a system. Now, what would fall under the system still? It's a very nice listing. May I be proud of the fact that it was firstly part in my doctorate thesis, where I tried to collect it together. In the middle, you have something with marked with the letter X, and that is something that I had to remove because that was about broadcasting, and this law could not cover broadcasting, telecommunication, yes, automation systems, yes. If we look back at some of the viruses that were present in some of the control systems, and that constituted what earlier in the profession was called, and I protested against it, was called the virus, which can bring damage to a hardware. There is no such a thing. It was always something that I emphasized, but still there is one. We have to count with it that there are, yes, viruses that can damage hardware. Anything can be, through these automated systems, anything can be exploded. And that's why we have to deal with that very closely. And whatever that has to be used for exploring, jamming, disturbing things, because these are all sorts of systems that we have to listen to, and all those who have an interest that these systems would work, like the government basically, should enjoy the same protection as the other systems. Now, what do we understand by the impact of the law, by what the law covers? Because the official title of the law is that the electronic security of government and local government entities. Yes, it does cover the government agencies and the local government agencies, and lists all those government agencies and local government entities which are covered by the effect of the law. And in addition, all those organizations and their information systems that have anything to do, that have in some kind of a relation with the previous ones. But this title is basically a trick. It's not. It's misleading, because we should not look at the wording, we should look at the content. Because when we look at the content, we say that it is the national, it also covers all the bodies that deal with the national finances. How one can define the national data assets, national data assets. What belongs to national data assets? That is also covered by the law, and all those systems that are dealing with that. And also what we call the critical systems, systems that are of major importance, significance, and all those, and the information infrastructure of all that.
Ott mondok, hogy ki mindenki tartozik bele. A pénzintézetek, a bankok, az energiaszolgáltatók, távközlési cégek, csak úgy a három legdurvábbat. Az élelmezési szektor, az egészségügyi szektor, ez mind beletartozik a kritikus infrastruktúrák közé. Ennek megfelelően az ő információs rendszereik, legalábbis azok az információs rendszerek, amik visszahatnak a teljes működésükre, úgy szintén a törvény hatálya alá tartoznak, tehát már messze-messze túlléptünk az
So we are way beyond just state institutions. We see that these three sets overlap, so there exist electronic information systems that belong to all three of these sets. This in itself is not a problem. It only means that the law applies to them threefold. The only problem is when the various authorities, because we have lots of authorities, when these authorities will tear at each other's hairs about who is competent on that specific piece of infrastructure. Obviously, it's very difficult for any organization to meet the requirements of three different authorities. So the scope brings with itself a lot of issues. What is the security of the electronic information system? This is the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of these data, as well as the integrity and availability of the system components and the system itself. It should be protected in a closed and risk weighted manner. If you have read any of these things in publications, it has been around for a lot of time. The definition is constantly being refined. As long as the definitions go, it's quite a nice definition. Well, actually, utilizing it in practice is something different, but obviously we do need to have a good definition. The system, as it specifies it, does mean closed. Do you happen to know what the closed protection system is? Does anybody remember? Some of you may have studied it even. Well, there is one guy who studied at my institute. So obviously we provide some protection against all relevant attacks. The full scope means that we provide these protections for each and every single system component. The reason being that we do not want to leave any penetration path that leads to the data we want to protect. Even if we protect all relevant attacks, we still may get penetrated. And however many protections we have added, every attack comes through the system components. If the individual components are not protected, then we are not protected. If you protect your door, threats will come through the window. If you also put a grid on the window, then you may get attacked from the roof or wherever else. So if someone wants to attack, they will find a path. But if we provide adequate protection at every system component for all relevant attack types, then I may arrive at the much desired situation where I'm actually protected. Although I must also add that security is in the eyes of the beholder. So actually specifying what security means, adding mathematical formulae, we have done this and this, and if we have done it, then we are secure. This does not apply. We are secure once we feel we are secure. Once we have done everything to secure the system as a whole and each and every one of its components against all relevant threats, and according to risk weightings. Risk weighting is a strength of the protection. This is what I stand to lose if my system gets broken in. This and this will be the damage I incur if I need to harden my system. Obviously, there is always a problem with the protection strength. You know, the classic case. What is damage? Lost profits and whatever, they'll be very fast to respond. Economists, for instance. And what is the damage that has not occurred? How can you actually put a value on a damage that you have not incurred due to your protection? This is an economic problem. Yes, there are possible damages, then we must adapt our protection to them. But as I've been asked, if we invest into this protection and it costs whatever, 100 million forints, what is the return of investment on that investment? Well, I had to answer, never. A protection investment has no ROI. What it does have is your security that certain threats will not happen. They may happen tomorrow or in 10 years if you don't protect yourself, but you still run the danger of that attack happening if you do not invest. Logical, physical, administrative areas are the ones where you need to take steps to secure your environment, and all three of them are equally important. You should not allow yourself to be enticed into trying to wait among them. So rules, regulations are very important. I have seen this countless times, the response, oh, everybody at our institute knows what they must and shouldn't do. Wonderful. And what happens if a new hire comes to the company, or if somebody just doesn't want to concur with that, or if somebody says, nobody told me, I haven't signed anything stating that I have been instructed on that, so you cannot blame me. So all of this, prevention, early warning, best thing is if we can prevent the damage. This may or may not be successful, but if you are unable to prevent damage, at least you should have early information that something is in the works. If it still happens, then we should at least be aware that it has happened. I always mention examples taken from practical security cases. If two armed robbers want me to hand over my wallet, I can be said to have noticed that attack, can't I? And what if in winter time my weekend house is broken into? When will I notice this? Obviously in spring when I first go there. So in IT systems, if your protection is not prepared for sensing attacks, well, as we say, zero is nothing. Okay, if zero is nothing, just add a couple of zeros after my bank account value. If there is no system noticing that something has in fact happened, then it will be too late by the time the system will notice it. Meanwhile, the system will get robbed or compromised or whatever. So the best thing is when somebody is in the process of adding zeros after his bank account or deposit value, and not weeks, months afterwards. And we are still not good enough if we meet this requirement, because a very important thing is still missing. It is the handling of security incidents. But obviously law contains a different word because it didn't want to allow us to use the word. In the case of incidents, remember what I told you before. When something happens, we should review what has happened, why it has happened, who is responsible for it having happened. he should be punished wherever possible, or at least be sacked. All physiological and administrative protection tasks should be performed, including, among others, to process and reprocess the events together with the colleagues so they understand what has happened and why it has happened and what is to be done to avoid it happening again. This is very important aspect. This is the whole purpose of analyzing security events, to be able to prevent them the next time. And then the law and the implementation regulation also contains the requirement to introduce security classes, and it's assign all components to one of these classes. The law may not be worded clearly enough. Yes, confidentiality, integrity, and availability each must be classified, because this is the only way to be cost efficient. Because if we only have one security class, that's okay and very easy to use, but what is high in terms of confidentiality and requires appropriate steps, it may have a low requirement on availability, so we shouldn't be forced to increase the system's availability just to be able to match the ranking assigned to confidentiality. And we have a lot of systems where availability is extremely important. For instance, a flight control system, which is a real-time system, their availability and integrity is paramount. What about confidentiality? Does anybody care that a flight is coming in? Well, everybody can see that flight coming in, so it is not confidential practically at all. So whatever regards confidentiality, you don't have to do practically anything, but you do have to do a lot of things to ensure the highest level of availability. If we have only one security class, then we would have to raise the confidentiality as well to the highest possible level and encrypt it 3 times and whatever, totally unnecessarily. We are still in the interesting situation where the law itself came into force on the 1st of July, and by that time, all implementation regulations actually would have had to appear by that time. It still hasn't happened. There are still some implementation regulations that are still not ready, including the National Minister for Development prescriptions for steps to be taken at the various ministries. I have actually seen people who have seen this being prepared. Okay, I can talk about it if needed, but nobody should tell me later on that I said something different. What I'm saying is something that I think is important. What we'll get from these important things into the law or into the implementation regulation, that's a different thing. So risk assessment must be the basis for the assignment into each of these security classes. And this risk assessment should be performed in accordance with some international or Hungarian standard or best practice. There is no prescription of having to use this or that basis. Whatever the basis is, you can do it paper-based, computer-based, or whatever else, or you can actually outsource it. The essence is that you have to perform a risk analysis and use the output to assign system components to security classes, and risk depends on the amount of damage and its probability of occurring. What the function is, the actual function that depends. It could be a multiplication of the two values or whatever else. But these are the two parameters that determine the risk. When we are talking about risk, about damage, then we do not have the largest possible damage in mind. For instance, if there is an earthquake, what happens if we count on the mother of all earthquakes that has never happened before? What will be the damage? It will be catastrophic. Everything will lay in ruins. Everybody will be affected. So if we investigate earthquakes as a potential threat, then the maximum damage it can cause is orbital. Okay, but just look at the seismic maps and check what sort of earthquakes will probably happen in Hungary, what damage it will cause, and it will significantly decrease the amount of damage that you have to reckon with. The problem gets still worse because you have to calculate with probabilities. In risk analysis, the traditional security risk. Well, what is the security risk of there being a break-in into one of the flats in a Hungarian house? Well, I just look up statistics for years back, and I can assign a probability to that. But all our previous statistics are not usable if I want to assign a probability to a system being compromised. Statistics aren't worth a penny. Tomorrow you may see a totally new type of attack. Just look at how attack types have evolved. If you look at viruses or any malware at all, they are continuously evolving. When I first heard about a virus, they only propagated through floppy disks. It didn't have any opportunity to propagate because there was no internet yet. And we still didn't even dream of pen drives and many other things. So what the virus could do was either to infect the boot sector or the program. Well, that's history. We now have mailing systems, internet, and lots of other things where malware can cause harm. And let me mention something very important about both the law and the implementation regulation.
Semmi se véresen kötelező.
Nothing of all that is written down is mandatory. Everybody can use any old risk analysis and make any steps they want, or practically any they want, if they can give a reason why they did so. So nobody says you must do this and this. The essence is the outcome. What has been achieved with all this? But the 5 damage classes are mandatory, as I said, with 5 the highest. If you start calculating integrity, confidentiality and availability, this 3 multiplied. So any system can be assigned to one of these categories. The ministerial order prescribes this NIST SP 800-53-4 security and privacy control. Why? We tried other methods. But when we try to use something else and then try to abbreviate it and then adapt it to Hungarian conditions, and well, it would have taken lots of work, and it would have been a big body of text. And finally, it turned out, thanks to my colleagues, that there is an American document that is a lot shorter, and my colleagues called our attention to the fact, and they did even more. They practically translated it into Hungarian and added some additions. Americans only have 3 classes, we have 5. And they also have beautiful tables in it. And I must finish with this because, okay, confidentiality, integrity, and availability, one is missing. Classes 2, 3, 4, 5. One is missing because what we say is that one is the basic security. If I create a system in a normal manner and I do everything for the system that needs to be done, then it already is class 1. If I don't open holes in the system knowingly, then I already have level 1. Where the table has 0, there we are okay, because that means that there's nothing nil to be done. Obviously, because however we look at it, business continuity planning has not much to do with confidentiality.
A sértetlenségre viszont már visszahat olyannyira, hogy ugye legalábbis a üzletmenet folytonosság tervezés 8-as, 9-es intézkedés sorozata az mind a 4 osztályában megvalósítandó a sértetlenségnek, de csak a 8-as, 9-es. Viszont a 4-es, 5-ös osztályban azért van zárójelben az 1-es, mert ott az 1-es úgynevezett kiegészítő intézkedést is meg kell csinálni hozzá. Hát aztán a rendelkezésre állásnál, ugye, ahogy mutatja, ott mondjuk a 4-esnél már gyakorlatilag mindet meg kell csinálni, azzal, hogy a 2-es intézkedés, a 4-es intézkedést, és így tovább ki kell egészíteni a kiegészítő intézkedésekkel is.
Measures. So this, of course, is fairly well outlined of what you have to do. That is fully integrated into the list. And what I would like still to draw your attention to is that there is an additional element that this P1 that you have to perform first, and after once you have completed everything that is under 1, then you go to P3 also. Now, just quickly, one important matter in order so that to speak about the practical implementation. It is the organizational security level. For the various IT systems, they all have their security levels, and the organizations that are there to exploit these systems, they have their own, the organizations have their own security levels. Of course, they can have several of these, so that with the various systems, that organization should be sufficiently prepared for all these existing systems, and it is according to the higher level in between these all systems that they have to cope with. And when of course, cost efficiency are also to be taken into consideration. These also involve organizational measures, such as would aim at an appropriate handling of all these matters, to deal with them in an appropriate way. Here you have COVID 4.1 maturity level to take it as a basis. This is how you have to perform this grouping into security categories. there are also several elements included in there. And as closing remarks, I talked about how to minimize costs in the implementation decree of the law. Of course, that is also commented upon. What I would still like to say that we tried to invent such solutions that it would be the chief executive officer of the organization who is responsible for everything. That responsibility couldn't be altered and couldn't be put on somebody else's shoulders. So I thought that in 45 minutes I would have been able to say something more about this topic. It was not possible, but as you know, of course, as all of the other lecturers, I myself, I will also be pleased to answer your questions. And thanks for listening to me.